Good morning. How's everybody? I'm pleased to be able to talk to you today in a short period of time to cover a very in-depth topic, which is the new molecule potassium formate for potassium nutrition. What I'm planning to do today in discussing potassium formate as a molecule and its utility in nutrition is to go through, first of all, what is it? Including, maybe a little overboard, but I am a chemist by training and, of course, a CCA for the last more than a decade. And to talk about not only what it is as a molecule, but to compare it against other commonly used molecules in potassium nutrition. Tantamount to that is to first go through a couple of basics, to talk about the solubility of each of those molecules, to talk about the benefit of a carbon-based anion in potassium in a molecule, and its importance particularly most recently, and to then compare potassium formate, kind of the pluses and minuses, pros and cons versus all the other molecules that are commonly used, particularly in California, of course, and then talk about our field experience and market availability. So this is the molecule of potassium formate, and I'm going to highlight each molecule as I go through this so that you can see kind of the differences. And especially when we get to the solubility slide, size matters, frankly. And so here, all potassium exists as a +1 cation, and then really solubility ends up being governed by what is this anion, what is its size, what is its likability to water? Is it hydrophobic or hydrophilic? And what you'll see here is how small the formate anion is. That's a pretty small anion compared to some of the other potassium molecules that are used for nutrition. Importantly, by weight, we have 39.1% potassium versus 45% by molecular weight of the formate. That's going to be important when we talk about both solubility and also the carbon contribution of this molecule. As we get into the charts and tables, what you're going to see is this is actually the most soluble form or soluble potassium molecule that's currently available, and we'll show you the data that supports that. We developed this molecule for fertilizer applications in California, starting back when we patented it. And so you might ask, well, if it was patented, how does that make it a new molecule? Well, compared to the other molecules, mostly that are used in nutrition, that's pretty new. And of course, it takes a really long time to develop the body of information across all crops, particularly all the specialty crops in California. Also, we manufacture this in our Madera facility for ag applications on the West Coast. And then we're going to look at some of the unique advantages of this versus other molecules. Most importantly, though, in plant nutrition and availability, you have to talk about solubility. Really, everything is governed by solubility. And, particularly in California where we have heat in the valley, where we have arid conditions quite a lot of the year, solubility matters more than in a climate where you have abundant rainfall and abundant water availability. So if you think about it this way, everything's going to be more available if you have very plentiful, saturated soils applied through drip, of course. But we often don't have that in California. And so little differences in solubility in a molecule, and not particularly potassium, but since that's our conversation today, certainly potassium is important. Potassium historically, as a cation, partially immobilizes in soil. And we'll talk about that more, but the anion contribution of that potassium cation can have a big impact. Commonly, elements produce high solubilities may have other undesirable characteristics. So you want to increase solubility of the K, the potassium, but you don't want that anion to have a negative impact. And we'll talk about what some of those might be in other molecules. And then, of course, it's been very common to produce a potassium cation by combining it with some other anion that's a mineral. And common examples of that are potassium chloride or muriate of potash or potassium thiosulfate. Those are probably pretty common ones that we see in our industry. And then finally, you don't hear too much until recently about carbon-based anions. So we really were looking at carbon-based anions in many of our chemistries for nutrition. Before, it was kind of the buzzword of sustainability and regeneration and, all these soil health and all the things we're really concerned about today. We were really looking at this before carbon was attractive, I guess we would say, or the buzzword. And the reason we did that is because we are a company of chemists with a lot of experience in many industries. I've been involved with agriculture since 1980, but as a company, we've been involved since 1993. So what we looked at was, from our chemistry perspective, what potassium could we develop that would have excellent solubility, and then coincidentally, maybe not such negative characteristics that might be associated with that anion. So we're going to talk about how solubility impacts all of these different molecules. And then secondly, the benefit of carbon. And I don't think there's probably anybody in this room that doesn't know what the potential benefits of carbon are in the soil. I'm from the Midwest, from Southern Ohio. I grew up on a family farm. The first time I came to California on vacation, not knowing anything about the agriculture here in the 70s, I was stunned by it. It's like, what's wrong with the dirt? It's really light. Because I come from an area with black dirt, soils that are very, very high in carbon material. And of course, once I became involved with agriculture here in 1980, I came to realize just how impactful the climate was on the challenges of keeping carbon in the soil, carbon materials. So I'm not going to go through these exhaustively because I want to spend more time on the various molecules. But if you look at that, so soil organic material is beneficial. It increases the surface areas on which positively charged nutrients like potassium become available or cling. All positively charged cations benefit from carbon in the soil. And perhaps most importantly, the carbon contribution has a lot to do with enzymatic activity and sustaining the microbiome. And of course, that's really hard to do when you have temperatures that exceed 100 for so many days of the summer that we have. So here is a comparison chart of the various solubilities of, and this is in grams of potassium, of K2O, which is of course commonly what we think of it in fertilizer salts, per 100 grams of water. And I had someone who was looking at our chart in booth 36 say to me, well, why are you going beyond, normal soil temperatures? Because we've gone up to 212 or boiling Fahrenheit. Well, we're chemists and we really do our research thoroughly. So obviously the zone that we care about is perhaps even in this, in the wintertime, but it's really in terms of most of our growing season, it's this zone. And what you can see here pretty stunningly is how much more soluble potassium formate is versus the other commonly used potassium salts in our nutrient programs. Potassium acetate, of course, is pretty soluble as well. Potassium thiosulfate is soluble. Some of these are probably shocking. I had someone discussing this with me about an hour ago, the fact that potassium nitrate isn't more soluble than that. So a lot of this can explain the behavior in soils and the amount that we put on, and even perhaps the mobilization of potassium at times. Here's another way of looking at it. I tend to be a graph person versus a table person, but here we have, I'll just pick kind of the middle of this zone. So potassium formate has significantly more solubility than potassium acetate. Whether that matters or not in a particular situation, can be discussed. And as you kind of go down the various different molecules, I think it's probably maybe not such a surprise that sulfate of potash applied dried, banded, depends a lot on rainfall, time, irrigation to become solubilized and readily taken up by the plant. And of course, that's one that's commonly applied through a solutionizing machine directly to drip. So now we're going to take some time going through the various other molecules, kind of listed in order of their solubility. The first one is potassium acetate. So you see here that this looks very familiar. It looks a lot like the formate portion. So the only difference between potassium formate and acetate is it has this extra carbon. And that is, of course, good, right? Because it adds more carbon to the soil. But it also, because now we have a little bigger anion here, it also decreases the solubility of this whole molecule and hence could impact how available the potassium is. So it's 65%, if we go back to the chart, of the solubility of potassium formate. It does contain carbon, a little more carbon actually than formate. It's relatively expensive versus other potassium fertilizers, which can be very acceptable because of the contribution of the carbon. And because of this relative expense and solubility, it tends to be currently limited to applications that relate to potassium deficiency. So if you're coming up on nut fill on your almonds and you see you have a tissue deficiency of potassium, then you may add a potassium acetate, or for that matter, also a potassium thiosulfate. Okay, potassium thiosulfate, another relatively soluble material, certainly commonly used, I think we would all agree, for deficiency symptoms mid-season or in-season, or, on almonds and pistachios. I know we commonly have seen, a couple of additions or applications a year, say 20 gallons or whatever, to make sure that we have enough potassium for nut fill. And so it has 40% of the solubility of potassium formate. And you don't have to be a chemist to see how this is so. So look at the size of the anion here. So the anion is pretty big. It has a sulfur. Again, that can be good or bad depending. And it has a contribution of 2 potassiums. So although it is a very readily taken up by the plant, it is not as readily taken up as a carbon-based anion. And that makes sense because look how big this part of this molecule is. It's big. It takes up a lot of room. And so it has been the popular go-to application for potassium deficiency and any situation where a fast uptake is required. It can require caution for application, particularly in really hot temperatures and at a certain time of day. And I think we all know that. You don't want to just go slug it in if it's, over 100 degrees. And you certainly want to watch your rates. And it is perceived as relatively expensive versus other potassium fertilizers like SOP. And then finally, that can limit its application as well due to cost. Potassium nitrate, I think, is the one that surprises people the most, because without looking at the molecule, you might think, wow, potassium nitrate, I perceive that as very, very soluble. But it just ain't so. Compared to potassium formate, it is 9% of the solubility. And again, you can see that. Look at how big this anion is. It's pretty big. It has 3 oxygens and a nitrogen, but of course it has been the go-to when someone wants to put on both potassium and nitrate at the same time. Potassium chloride, I think in the last 2 years we've probably all seen or used more of that, because it's relatively inexpensive, But in drought years with no water availability, we have seen chlorides and boron and sodium accumulate in our soils and have a detrimental effect on some of our crops. And so as a result, we had been up until 23 resistant to put in anything that contributed to chloride, or optimistically hope for rainfall in the winter so we could have some leaching. So I think everybody's pretty familiar with this one. It has a relatively low percentage of potassium, so more is required because the chloride anion weighs a lot. And then finally, it has been the go-to for sure during tough economic times, or with, if you have a sensitive, low commodity price, then you're probably not going to go with a more expensive carbon-based or thiosulfate form. And then finally, potassium sulfate, very good and dependable. Sort of the go-to on post-harvest permanent crops, banded on either side of the tree row. Only 3% of the solubility of potassium formate, but gosh, it's 50% K2O, so who doesn't like that? So it has been the go-to. It's inexpensive versus other potassium fertilizers, and very much the go-to still on post-harvest applications and like ground prep on row crops. How are we doing on time? Perfect. Now let's go into more of the specifics on potassium formate specifically. Potassium formate, again, is the most soluble and available form of potassium fertilizer, and its enhanced solubility results in increased plant uptake. It's carbon-based, so any potential negatives associated with a chloride, a sulfate, a thiosulfate, a nitrate, or a carbonate, almost anything you could add as an anion except carbon could have some negative implications depending on your application. It's plant and soil friendly. It has excellent economics. Now, people will go, wait a minute, is it more expensive or not on a price per pound or ton? Well, it is more expensive. But because of this greatly enhanced solubility, you can use less and have better uptake in even challenging soil conditions. So once you get over the shock of the price per pound, and it's actually not that shocking, it ends up having excellent economics, and we've proven this with many years of application in all crops. It also has a broad range of compatibility for retailers to blend with other nutrient components, both micronutrient, nitrogen, and even phosphate in some limited applications. So as a result of that, we're able to go through retail so that retailers can make their own specialty blends and apply a very soluble form of potassium as well as add other stuff. So as a result, it has market appeal. It has nutrient efficiency. It has sustainability with good economics. And along with that, it has ease of application. So ultimately, it's environmentally friendly. So without the expense of shocking the grower into believing that they can't afford something that's sustainable or carbon containing, this is a molecule that really fits the bill. Our field experience is extensive. We have been selling this direct to growers. And so we have very extensive experience in every crop in California that I can think of. All permanent crops, row crops. Of course, our experience is the most extensive in, the big boys in our industry. Almonds, pistachios, grapes, tomatoes. But we have a broad experience in all permanent crops, as well as, so I'm trying to think of pomegranates, olives. You pretty much name it, we've done it. And then row crops, certainly the big row crop is tomatoes, but, we have a lot of experience in others, including melons. And, again, you kind of go down the row. Garlic, onions, you name it. Generally, we can apply less on the basis of K2O, often significantly less. And that goes back to this superior solubility of the molecule. And then finally, it's because of these good economics, because of this good solubility, it's applicable in all micro applications, which includes post-harvest and in-season. So initially, growers were reluctant to replace the old standby SOP, sulfate of potash, because that has, you add 400 to 600 pounds as SOP and you get 200 to 300 pounds of K2O. But the uptake of that K2O can be unpredictable. And so we're able, for example, on that similar application to put in 20 to 30 pounds as K2O and have immediate uptake with no immobilization in the soil, with just as good economics without the tractor work or labor-intensive aspect of it. It's also very easy for grower applied, so we sell this both through our continuous program, which we call the white box, as well as grower applied. This is our flagship grower applied product. So we actually sell a lot more of that for direct grower applied than we do through our continuous program. And then I mentioned this earlier, for retailers who may be sitting in the room, it has excellent blendability with other fertilizers. And of course, I would always have to make the parenthetical note that you always should check with DPG about that compatibility. If you're not comfortable with your jar test, we can advise on that. And then finally, we also use this extensively in our foliar products for all kinds of bloom and foliar applications. Just a little bit more about the effort that we put into this. We have a very strong patent position on potassium formate. We currently have 5 patents and others that are pending. Our patent involves the use of it with fertilizer by itself and in conjunction with nitrogen and phosphate and micronutrients. And any combination of these grower applied as a blend, or also through the white box where we're blending various streams in the main line. This is a list of our current patents, and we also have a patent pending for formic acid and formate salts for soil conditioning and nutrient uptake. So as you can see, we have a lot of years left on the term, and then our current patents. We just got one, but I forget what it was issued. It just issued like 2 days ago. So I don't even know what that is for sure right now. Just to conclude, so our market availability on potassium formate is Deer Point markets direct to grower for grower applied or through our continuous program, the white box. And then we have an exclusive marketing agreement with Yara where it is marketed as Yara Terra K-Max through retail. So I think I finished in perfect timing. Thank you so much.